random file. What would you say to this person?
The beginner's guide is, well, it's a half-walking simulator, half-story-driven experience. It's hard to call this experience a game, since it's more of a walk through a person's mental state through 17 minigames that a man by the name of Coda supposedly developed between 2008 and 2011. We're not going to go through every game, but a good selection showing the most distinct mental states Coda has gone through. Entering the second game, we see what appears to be the abandoned remnants of a sci-fi first-person shooter, with no monster sprites nor any challenge aside from a labyrinth which appears near the end. Davey, the writer, designer, and narrator of this game, claims that there's little to no meaning to the game.
This game is called Escape from Whisper, and it's one of the more generic games you'll see from Coda.
Yet here, Davey attempts to insert meaning into a glitch exploited in Coda's game, in that a beam that you use to sacrifice yourself at the end of the game means a journey into the peaceful afterlife after a stressful reality. Entering the fifth game, we see the first instance of a challenge, a puzzle in the form of a set of doors, one which has two switches, one on the outside and one on the inside. Whilst the game seems short and unfinished, removing the walls of the last room of the game shows just how many were planned. Supposedly this was new for Coda, so he perhaps stopped after feeling just proud enough of himself to call it a game. Here we see the roof and floor lighting trying to add depth to the scene. That combined with the stone texture of the walls gives the game a portally aesthetic, and since the game was developed in January 2009, it's hard to believe this was an accident. The doors also demonstrate a sort of cause and effect, due to the fact that the only way to advance in the game is to believe in the doors closing to reveal the next switch to advance. This is a long game. If it's okay, I'm gonna break it into sections. Here we see a huge white void with a cafe called the Streetwise Fool. Looking up the meaning of this name yields only the cafe from the game. Shocker. Anyways, after entering the kitchen, we see a black void filled with source texture-covered wedges and cuboids, where you slowly descend. Oh hey, the tile's actually relevant. Wondered why the fifth one didn't happen. Onwards, you see a prison. Enter a random cell, you heinous excuse of a player, and stay in there for 1 hour. And by 1 hour, I mean 9 seconds. I was wondering about that typo in the script. Forward, you go past the puzzle again, and enter a room with 3 people and 1 speaker, who asks you to explain the way out, and goes on about the black space between the puzzle doors. Rinse and repeat, rinse and escape. Finally, we reach the end, and here we see a lamppost and... the lack of escape?
I want to break free!
So what does this all mean? In my interpretation, this could be Coda exploring a subtle concept of depression, the descent meaning a literal mental descent. The black space in the puzzle could be isolation, and the speaker encouraging the player to go back to the black space, being the mind subconsciously wanting to return to isolation. Davey even helps us with the lamppost part.
He wants the work to be leading to something, which is what this lamppost is. It's a destination.
Even the size and grandioseness of the rooms could be a reference to a power difference between you and the subconscious, but I can only go on for so long about this game before the 9th game shows a prison that you can escape, only to lead to a well, which was visible in the distance already. So, therefore, it's less of an escape and more of a premonition to said escape, or an allegory for how you can escape depression at its worst. You can only continue the progression, or at least that's how it looks in Coda's eyes. Then in version 2, you get a small opportunity of choice for what goes on in the prison to make it less unbearable, but no matter what you select, you always get the same things in order. A table, 2 couches, a lamp, and another table. This could be an early sign of how outcomes might feel pointless or predictable regardless of choice, which can be applied to life. Davey then flicks us through 7 more versions of the game with seemingly random modifications until we hit version 10, which shows us a single payphone, which could say that after the short spiral, this could serve as a form of comfort, someone to vent to about his feelings. Remember, he's not showing the games to anyone, so he's free to do whatever he likes with the game.
Coda starts making these games, and he never releases any of them. He doesn't put them onto the internet, he just makes them and then immediately abandons them and they sit on his computer forever.
1 year and 3 games later, we see a game that basically spells out the feeling of burnout from game development. Here we see you're isolated in a dreamland looking for a guiding voice, potentially your friend trying to help you out. Perhaps the white void and the constant mistiness could be a sign of brain fog, a symptom of depression. After a long journey in Yo, the puzzle again, we arrive at a collage of lines from previous games. But here, we see that the protagonist, in order to make the friend feel better about themselves, to essentially ask or even manipulate the player to be positive despite their mindset. This is what is known as toxic positivity, and here it is essentially the last shambles of what can be considered happiness. Even the blissful soundtrack playing in the background gets constantly distorted every other time it loops. But in the last game, even this fades. Here, the entire game gets turned upside down. The scale of the tower makes the player feel small and powerless, and the black sky shows the depths of their misery. And there's no way I can complete a whole understanding of the game in 6 minutes, but at the very end... Well, can I tell you something? I lied about the whole thing. The thing is, Davy is the more depressed one of the duo, and in fact, at times these games were more tailored to Davy than Coda, because Davy mentions the games were more experimental at the beginning, and Coda goes on to mention that he added the solutions because it would please Davy. The fact that these games are out in the public is a fault of Davy, as Coda intended the games to be private. Davy even modified every single one of the games from number 7 to number 15 so as to include the lamppost. In fact, Coda was never depressed. He was very likely just suffering burnout. Keep in mind how he never mentioned anything drastic in the old games, and was only referring to the games as to mention burnout. And as we close on the game, instead of the puzzle being completed in the traditional sense, the inside switch is nowhere to be found, leaving the player and Davy to reflect on the past. Okay, can we brighten up the mood a little bit? Okay, the game does an excellent job at showing the journey through burnout. And more than that, it shows the potential of experimental game design and show don't tell, because even if the context and dialogue was removed, the bleariness and the music speak for themselves. The experience is great, and I would give it a 9 out of 10, because in my opinion, some games do lose a little bit of meaning through Davy skipping them.
You know, that one used to actually loop the cleaning chores and you just cleaned a house forever. I had to cut it off so that you could exit the house and the game would actually end.
But the environment is almost enough to make up for it. The game is actually relatively cheap, available for $14.50 on Steam. However, it only gives you 90 minutes of gameplay, but if you have a strong heart and can take the depressive feel and outright venting, then it is a good recommendation. Glad I'm done with that game. Surely there's no other games in my library that could potentially make me feel... Oh, for the love of God...